Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I feel slightly intimidated to be in the company of so many economists today. I am a humble mathematician before you, and I always was intimidated by economist colleagues at university because our equations had solutions and your equations had difficulties. And the difficulties generally are that it's the people who mess it up. And so I went on from studying things where there was perfection in equations to a world where it is all just about practice and the messy reality of the real world, and which is full of people. Within this, I mean, I'm discussing our own example of Triodos Bank, which I'm less sure of how to categorize as a bank. A Catholic friend of mine told me recently that since the Pope has declared that he may in fact not be infallible, he only can conclude that it's not really the Pope. My own reality of experience is that since we are a bank who've never borrowed from the wholesale markets nor from the central bank, I'm not sure that I'm representing a bank. What I do know is that Triodos Bank is an example of a stakeholder bank. We are in Northern and Western Europe in 6 countries. We have around 8 billion euros of assets under management, about 400,000 customers. And the principal business model is a retail banking model where we use savers' deposits to fund businesses, principally and pretty much all exclusively SMEs, and importantly those which are doing something socially, environmentally positive. So I'll be talking a little bit around the relationship to sustainable banking and the degree to which local banking is linked to sustainable banking, in particular in the essence of proximity of the banker to the market. And maybe first I will just start by the kind of question, for sustainable banking, what does that mean to you? I was at a conference not so long ago talking to sustainable development policymakers and practitioners, not financial specialists, and they said, it's really funny when you talk about sustainable banking generally, because for you the word sustainable there just means banks which don't fall over. It just means banks which don't end up costing society a lot of money by states having to pay for them. Whereas for sustainable development practitioners, there is something more holistic in terms of planetary balance, intergenerational equity, care for society and the world that we live in. So there was something of a dilemma there. And for us, it is more than just a bank that does not fall over, useful though that property is. It is about a bank that actually can put its values first, that can put society first in its decision-making, that is one which, in similar way to other banks with other different business models, is able to use profits in order to support its mission, which is about more than just its profits. So we are a mission-led bank. And we are not alone in terms of the types of banks which are commercial in structure. So we are not a charity. It's a profit-making organization. It is independent. It has shareholders, although the governance of our organization is such that the shareholders have the profit rights for the bank, but the voting rights for the bank are enshrined within a trust which protects the mission. That's a particular Dutch structure. We're domiciled in the Netherlands, which is where we started in 1980. And we're part of a banking network called the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, who have enshrined some of these principles of triple bottom line, lending to the real economy, being long-term in our relationships, being resilient, transparent, and more than anything else, and something I want to talk about today, is embedding that right the way through the culture. Because like in society, banks are also populated full of people, and that the perfect structures and the perfect rules and the perfect regulations can also be polluted by the people who are working within them, and therefore the cultural aspects are important. Earlier today we had Charles Goodhart talking about historical lessons, and it's very important that we take the lessons of history into how we set policy for the future. However, some of the lessons that we will need to take for the future are not necessarily things which we have seen in the past. We have seen housing bubbles in the past. We have not necessarily seen a climate crisis and a carbon crash before. I was noticing within myself, I had slightly visceral reaction despite agreeing with a lot of Michael's presentation on the Chicago plan about the concept of indestructible money. The concept of indestructible money within a destructible world was what was a vision I came up with of a person being the last remaining human on Earth, but just making sure that they had indestructible money. And in a way, what I'm trying to focus on is that we don't really exist in isolation. The money is a social concept, and therefore it is designed, it is enshrined in the relationships which we have with each other. And importantly, the banker plays a role within the relationship between people who are choosing to call themselves depositors and those who are choosing to identify themselves as borrower, no matter what construct of money is in existence. So, what do these banking institutions look like? Well, in terms of sustainability, there's sustainability at different levels. In terms of institutions, that we've heard lots of examples of banks around the world where you don't need to rely upon a bonus culture. You don't need to have massive inequalities in salary. You can have more flat decision-making and devolved decision-making which is closer to the relationships which you're having with customers. You can have more open and transparent governance. Within products, you can have things which are specifically designed to help society and are looking to see how you can actually play a useful force in being able to unlock the creativity of entrepreneurs. And within that, it's all around the relationships of what is it that the banker can do which is useful for society. And I believe that actually sustainable banking can hold the key to saying, where's the challenge here? Bankers could do a lot more than just operating a transitory mechanism. In fact, in terms of looking at the challenges we all face in our future for the balance of society and our planet, bankers are going to be necessary in being able to unlock the creativity of entrepreneurs to build the economy that we need to rely on for our future survival. So I'm going to talk a little bit around our lending relationship and our approach to lending. And it's based upon a threefold approach, which is where, in a way, the name of Triodos Bank comes from. And it's around the health of organizations at three different levels. So when we meet an entrepreneur, we're looking at more than just the financial, operational business risk. There has to be the practical level, and we all have credit risk skills which are comparable to what you would find in any banking organization. But it's the relationship of how that level is at a basic platform level, which has to be healthy, just as healthy as the level of social connections. So all the stakeholders around a business, the customers, the suppliers, the employees, everyone that the business touches, and at the level of motivation, inspiration, and values. The social capital that an entrepreneur can recruit from the basis of them being really motivated to do something in society rather than just in it for the quick buck and profit, is maybe all that you've got to recruit from in a risk situation where things don't turn out, because that's the only thing which binds that company together. And so therefore, despite at one level talking about motivation, inspiration, and values as being something a banker would do, might sound a little bit airy-fairy, or very alternative. We see it as fundamental as a tool in risk management. So far, though, we've not found a way, and the regulators haven't found a way, of being able to represent this into a model. You cannot put the inspiration and the social capital and the values of an entrepreneur and how much people really want to give of themselves to really make this work in their community or in the sector. You cannot convert that into Excel. It's too bad that banking just turns out to be more of an art than a science. So I'd like to talk a little bit around the new bankers that we require. When people in large banks talk about changing the culture within banking, what they're actually doing sometimes is using a proxy for structures and rules and incentives which have driven behaviors to change people. But actually, it takes a long time for people to change and for new people to learn new practices and behaviors to become habits and habits to become values. In the old system, there was a focus on a trading mentality which motivated people to take risks, rather than a motivation to have a more balanced approach, to be able to really deeply embed oneself within a sector, to understand something, to keep risks in balance. In the old system, there was a focus on shareholders, in fact, of self-value and self-profit, rather than on stakeholders, and again on balance. The motivation on profit rather than on values, on opaqueness rather than transparency, on the short term over the long term. One of the things which this leads to is that a banking sector culturally becomes addicted to certain ways of operating where it comes with a level of this is what we do. This is what we do, rather than how can we make this work? For us at Triodos Bank, where we are working with entrepreneurs in renewable energy, in organic food and farming, in social enterprise, new forms of entrepreneurs bringing something to the world, it's very motivating to ask the question, how can we make this work? For those of you at Brian's lecture after lunch about the discouragement factor for SMEs, one of the things which I believe will promote that quite a lot is if banks can only say, this is what we do, then that will lead to discouragement, whereas the whole part of how bankers can actually be part of the story of the development of economies is incredibly motivating. It allows bankers to co-create with entrepreneurs the economy that we can potentially see as being more sustainable. We've been part in looking at how we therefore renew ourselves. So we were pioneering in certain things like renewable energy, working with farmers and single turbine installations, doing project finance on a micro scale that other banks would not look at, being able to perfect it so that we could allow for the financing of community schemes. We're looking to see how we can keep asking the question, how can we make this work for other sectors? How do we develop our expertise in sectors? And I'm talking a lot in sectors, but in a way this is the theme of proximity. Local banks, like the Sparkassen, are very, very rooted to their community. They have an understanding of that community. In the example, I'm going to jump a few ahead within the Global Alliance, where we have banks in microfinance, for example, in Peru. In Mibanco, the modus operandi for a banker is that they go to the office very early in the morning and they do about an hour's administration, and then they are literally for the rest of the day out with their community, so that when somebody is asking for a loan, they don't need to do due diligence from scratch because they've known her grow up, they've known her parents, they've known her friends, they've been able to have conversations about what kind of businesses that you want to start. There is a rapid response of how to make it work, which is culturally embedded because they live within that community. Within sectors, though, if you are looking at a broader community of interest, rather than just, say, for example, within Winchester, but within the sphere of organic farming, we have people who are totally integrated with organic farmers and have become specialists within that. And the proximity and the knowledge, therefore, of the sectors, what drives those markets, what's important to them, who are the players, who are the suppliers, everything around that is really important for us to fully absorb so that we can have exactly the same level of service to those communities, albeit that they are communities of interest rather than communities of geography. So does it work? Well, this is a report, I'm not just going to reference it, I'm not going to talk through it all, but a report that we did which compared the Global Alliance banks, and we are an alliance of 22 banks from all continents in the world, with a diversity of business models, some microfinance banks, some credit unions in North America, some of the social banks in Europe, and compared certain ratios between our banks and the system banks, the too big to fail global banks. And what we found, unsurprisingly, was, well, the sustainable banks have a hugely higher weighting of loans as part of what constitutes their assets, also a hugely higher concentration of deposits. Find that there's much higher capital. That's not necessarily a surprise to anyone given the way that capital requirements are set. Very interestingly, that sustainable banks had a much better return on assets, and since the crisis at least, well, a comparable return on equity. In fact, it was around 1% higher since the crisis, but even before the crisis, if you looked back and averaged it out, it is still comparable, even with all the capital requirement advantages of the advanced approach banks who reduce their capital base. That's available on the Global Alliance website, gabv.org. A lot of the banks that we are associated with are focused on transparency and impact. And transparency is important for more than one reason. It's not just so that we can say what we do, and we like to say what we do because we're very proud of it, but because culturally it builds a community between our savers and between our borrowers, with us in the middle. We can see the borrowers who come to us can see the people for whose money is potentially being exposed, and the people who put their money with us, quite literally, and that's a map of the UK, can see every single loan that we make. That is not something which is generally done within the banking system. It would be no surprise to you to know, but actually I see no reason why it should not be done. By having that understanding and connecting the public to banks in a radically different way, that is what we also hope to promote in terms of being able to change the debate. I'm very glad to talk amongst economists. I'm glad that there's some members of the public coming today. I feel more comfortable with being part of the public. And I think that our role as well in society, for us as a sustainable bank, is by being able to increase the consciousness of individuals about their role, so that there is less blame in society of just the bankers in the abstract, but actually so they can figure out within this relationship of depositors and borrowers and bankers what everybody's role is and what everyone has to own within that, so that we can reconstitute the economy. In fact, my goal is for bankers, rather than to be at the bottom of the table, the most hated profession in the UK at the moment. I think it just slipped below traffic wardens and estate agents. But my goal is for by 2020, if I've been successful, it is for bankers to be the most loved and most respected profession. And that will need a radical shift, and it will only happen if the public are given the tools to become more conscious of everybody's role within that. I'd like to talk finally a little bit around some of the work in the Alliance, and to be able to give some indicators of real-world examples, which is being a practitioner for the last 15 years where I've mostly spent my time, both in banking and in investment, and talk about some of the entrepreneurs that we've worked with, and in particular some of the bankers and the way that they've worked with them in a different way. The first example, Songy's First Nation, is in British Columbia in Canada, where Van City, which is the largest credit union in North America, is active. And the First Nation is an Aboriginal group. There's a band of around 650 people who were granted a license by the local government to actually have tax-raising powers. They were, albeit a small group of people, effectively a government. And so therefore, for the banker of Van City, they had to really ask the question, how do we make this work, rather than this is what we can do, because they needed to conceive of a way of financing something which was not just about collateral and security and a business. This was a government that they were dealing with future revenues based upon taxation. And so they were able to relate to them in a different way in order to be able to construct a community centre, a wellness centre that served the whole community. So they also needed, as bankers, to understand what good construction meant. So it has to be this thing in balance between the motivations, ideals, values of the entrepreneur, the group of people, and also the embedded sort of financial reality. I've talked about Mibanko. The third example, Yondon, is a customer of Bank in Mongolia. A very rural example in the Global Alliance members, where Bank was working in Ulaanbaatar, which is the coldest capital city in the world, to provide specific loans to individuals to insulate houses, where individuals were spending 30% of their income on coal and fuel. So there you can see how a system or a bank's intervention and its relation to individuals through microfinance can actually build to the environmental issues which are emergent in emerging economies, whereas economic development has been the primary strand. They are now recognizing that the planetary system is very much embedded. So they've already moved their system on to environmental ones. The last one, Bristol Together, which is where I live, and a project which I was involved with directly. An entrepreneur who came into the bank with an idea to support ex-offenders by creating both mentoring opportunities and genuine skills transfer by having a sustainable business model that buys dilapidated houses off auction, having these lads learn how to refurbish properties, so therefore learning practical skills, all doing that within a sustainable business model that was not reliant upon subsidies. And there we were working both from the banking side but from an advisory side to really put together a deal. So really making sure that it was robust from the practical property management and financial management terms, and to be able to make something both sustainably, socially and environmentally. And us having to develop our own business as banking from just the retail savings and loans to also corporate finance advisory and sometimes direct impact investments where we're investing directly in renewable energy schemes or in microfinance institutions around the world is something which we are always wanting to do as a means of growing with our clients. And that's what growth means to us. It's not about an end to itself. It's about being able to co-create with these entrepreneurs the reality that we want to see. So I hope I've shown that, in a way, this is an example of sustainable banking being done in practice and being successful. with the academics in the room, you'll forgive me if I pose a question to you in terms of if it can be done or not. It seems to be a good idea which is working in practice. It is yet to be seen whether it can work in theory. And I maybe challenge you to contact me with your thoughts on how this fits within your own constructs and within your own perceptions of an overall banking system of which these types of banks are also part. Thank you very much.